Hey folks, it's Indieguy. Here I was, making a video on Jackx that got completely nuked because of my hardware, you know, just chillin'. When out of the blue, I receive an email in my YouTube contact mail, which is a weird thing, I never get anything there. But would you believe that it was the developers of Forgive Me Father, a beautiful Lovecraft-inspired boomer shooter that I just love. And they were asking me, Indieguy, to make a video on their latest game, Forgive Me Father 2. And I'm not one to disappoint, at least them. I mean, the dude with barely 200 subscribers isn't really the first person you think of when you want publicity done, but I'm not one to look a gift horse in the mouth, especially since that horse is a boomer shooter. And you know I have to have my fix. To start off, what even is a boomer shooter? Well, it's an FPS that either by style or by gameplay, but usually both, tries to emulate games like Doom, Quake, Blood, etc. that were all made in the 1990s or even early 2000s. But one could also consider that these games that inspired the new ones to be boomer shooters themselves. Most people agree, but it depends on who you ask. With that said, is the plot of a boomer shooter important to the overall game? Usually, no, but I like to structure my videos like this, so fuck off. And another thing, is it important to this game and do you need to play the first game to understand the plot? To both, more or less, so let's start with the first game. In that game, you play as two characters, a priest and a journalist. However, nothing really changes, both are asked to come meet their cousin Lewis in their hometown of Pestisville. But when they get there, monsters start to appear, roping them into a Lovecraftian conspiracy that involves the entire town and more. Now, I can't really decide if I like this approach or not, because it can be one of two things. It can either be laziness or some kind of 4D chess move that my little reptile brain cannot comprehend. Anyways, I have to spoil the story a bit. The big plot twist is that both characters end up having gone insane and were actually killing the townsfolk. You know, just an honest mistake. And this is where the second game picks up from, but only for the priest. He wakes up in an insane asylum, and again, monsters attack. Only this time, you're not alone. You have the voices inside your head. Yeah, and I actually like the voices. It's a fun way of giving explanations to things that you would otherwise not really understand. And the voice acting is actually pretty well done.
Right. Will you confront your trauma first? Or will you dare to question your knowledge?
Now, this game has a less cohesive storyline, but we do dwell into the inner workings of the priest himself. You know, his memories and his shady past. The cool thing though is that you get to decide if he gets to be forgiven or not. Yeah, occasionally there will be some decisions that affect the story that lead to one of two very similar and very underwhelming endings. But look, the story itself is nothing to write home about, yeah sure, but like any boomer shooter, the focus isn't really on the story. Now, what is a boomer shooter without a little boomer shooting, am I right, fellas? Exactly, you get straight. But in this game, it's actually pretty good. The shooting is fluid and the action is actually really well done. Even compared to the first game, everything seems more polished in this regard. So when it comes to guns, there is a wide variety of them that are divided into 6 types. Melee weapons, pistols, shotguns, rifles, explosives, and exotics. These are all pretty self-explanatory in what they do. Except maybe for the exotics, that aren't really a type that is set in stone. But if I had to describe them, I'd say they're really powerful experimental weapons. In each weapon type, there are 4 different guns to choose from, but you can only carry 1 from each type at a time, so you have to choose wisely what to bring to a level. There are definitely some weapons that you'll prefer over others, but I don't think there are any bad ones. There are some guns like the double-barrel shotgun or even the starting revolver that are both so meaty in sound and feel that it will almost feel wrong to swap them out. But at least when I did so, I was actually pleasantly surprised. Cooler yet are some of these weapon designs. Yeah, you have your normal guns made by humans, but then you have these guns that are infused with these terrifying sea creatures, or just are those same sea creatures. Hell, there's even a gun that is straight up just an elder thing from Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. But to go along with the designs, the reloads are also beautifully animated. It really looks like the devs spent a massive amount of time on this part alone, and I love it. But weapons are just a part of what makes a good boomer shooter. Another part are the things that you shoot at. And before we get into how the enemies work, let me just say they look amazing. This almost golden age of comics style really fits with the Lovecraftian concept. Their designs are pretty creative and recognizable from afar, which is something very important when you're constantly fighting 10 different enemies at once and they all behave differently. Moving on though, the enemies are used expertly to populate the level. For example, there's this one monster that after you come into its line of sight will fire a sort of rail that deals a bunch of damage. So a lot of the times this guy will be concealed far away in the darkness, forcing you to get up close and personal using the cover. Another great example would be the barrel mimics that are almost always found in tight spaces, so you can put 2 and 2 together. Also, the regular zombies are great. Sure, they can be killed easily, but if you go for a headshot, they will replace their head with the one they have on their hand. Now, this is already a thing that happened in the first game, but it's such a fun visual gag that affects the gameplay, and I love it. These are just some examples. Most, if not all, enemies have something up their sleeve, but if I were to list them all, we'd be here for a while, and probably most people already clicked off. The only thing that I have to complain about are the boss fights. Now, you have one that is actually kind of creative, being this video gamey level, but apart from how it looks, the boss fight is nothing to write home about. All a boss fight is just shooting at the dude until it dies. There are no notable gimmicks, no specific ways of killing a boss, nothing. And this also goes for the final boss, which is the biggest joke of them all. You can clear him in a couple of minutes, or even less. This guy poses no threat at all. It even manages to be more anticlimactic than the ending itself, which is a hard thing to do. But this is super weird. The boss fights in the first game were a lot better than these ones. What gives? The thing with Forgive Me Father as a whole is that there are some RPG elements to it as well. In the first game you had this stack tree that allowed you to choose which weapon variations you get, and a level system that gives you points to spend on that tech tree. This is a good enough system, but you have to basically stick to your choices, seeing as you get limited resets. In this game though, the RPG mechanics have been simplified. There's no longer a tech tree, so to get new weapons, you have to find weapon tokens scattered throughout the levels. You also have this new point system that allows you to purchase passive or active abilities. Passive abilities range anywhere from improving your flashlight to giving you back the bullets you miss. Now, the active ones are only activated when you go into madness mode. This madness mode is sort of like your ultimate move, but what happens in it is entirely up to you. You can freeze enemies, you can do more damage, or my personal favorite, you can siphon enemies' health by shooting at them. But I love the ability system in specific because it limits you to only 3 abilities in total. So you have to either sacrifice madness or risk being weak while not in it. But with this, finding a set of abilities that you like is a pretty cool process that encourages you to play around with them and experiment with the gameplay. As for the weapon tokens, I also like them. They reward exploration by letting you pick what weapon you want to play with. And that's a pretty cool way of doing it. Okay, after all this, we're still missing the levels. But before we move on to their function, let's just take a minute to appreciate just how beautiful and varied they are. Since the story is all jumbled up, you got a wider variety of locations to explore, and they're all pretty wild. You have city levels set in Egypt, in the Arctic, in World War I, and the list just goes on. And they look really cool. Again, the hand-drawn style really suits the environments and the aesthetic that game is aiming towards. But what about functionality? Are the levels any fun to go through? Yeah, the great majority of levels are really well crafted, not just because of how they use the enemies, but also because of the way they flow and how good they hide secrets and collectibles. And also, there were not a lot of times in this game where I actually got lost or I didn't know how to progress. Yeah, sure, this is a boomer shooter, that will happen at times, but honestly, those are very few and far between. This isn't to say that the levels are too simple. They're just able to strike a nice balance between simplicity and the normal boomer shooter experience. And this is visible when you take a look at how hard it is to get 100% completion in some of these levels. The secrets themselves though, I don't think are anything special. There is another thing to talk about though, and that is the antique clocks that are this game's hidden collectible. Now, they make a lot more sense than the last games, which were the barrels for some reason. But again, nothing to write home about, they're just there for you to see the little numbers go up. The next cool thing about this game is that there's a hub world, where you can access new levels, replay old ones, select your abilities and weapons, and just fuck around. There's even this fun little mini game where you can try out one of the melee weapons. Just, don't drink the soup. In almost every aspect, I think that this is a clear step forward from the first game, and that was already considered a great game by itself. It feels familiar, but fresh enough to be interesting. It isn't to say that it is a perfect game. The story, even though it is based on the Lovecraftian mythos, and I love that, is somewhat lacking, and the boss fights are laughably bad. And these are the things that I think the first game does a lot better. Its ending was a bit more interesting, and the boss fights had a lot more thought put behind them. But with that, I think that the game still deserves an 8 out of 10. But please, don't think that just because I got given the game, I'm sucking up to the depths. I genuinely enjoy Forgive Me Father 2, and if you're a fan of boomer shooters, you should give it a shot if you haven't already. Hell, even if you don't like boomer shooters, you might still like it because of its amazing art style. But that's really about it. See ya.
I promise you I'll always be right here. I'm right next to you.